The top tip is not reacting, like we said earlier on the call. There's so many companies which, a month ago they were saying we're never taking an office in central London again. I mean, literally a month later, it's like, well, actually, no, we do want an office, and we want to have our own office. We want to have our own front door. It's very easy for people to react at the moment, and I think what we're seeing on the ground is actually, I'm not trying to overplay this, but there is certainly kind of a lot of room for hope.
Hi everyone, we're here today as part of the Knowledge Share. We're Vic Limited, which is myself, Robin Mackney, our owner Victoria Stairs, and our workplace consultant analysis, Mark Kitching. We're here with the guys from Situu, which is Harry, Tom and Dan, and we're here basically to discuss kind of return to office, what the future workplace looks like, and how we can help occupiers as a collective entity. To get us started, we're going to talk about kind of myth busting around the future office space, what co-working looks like, and what we're hearing in terms of open plan. Is that over? What does that mean going forward? How does that look when we do actually return to the office? Who would like to open the floor first?
I'm happy to talk if you want.
Go for it.
Go ahead. Well, I think you obviously put on the document there in terms of just some fundamentals around open plan being over, and the fact that we don't think it is. The fact that it's it's easy to clean. You can see people a lot easier. You can see when people are coming across the office to socially distance, which is something that the co-working world can support. So the short answer is certainly no. There'll be some real challenges on the return to work phase due to social distancing, obviously. And there's a lot of providers at the moment just working through how that looks from a hygiene, a cleaning, a people flow point of view. But as we go forward, I think into the future post COVID, when there's a vaccination, hopefully in the near future, the way we utilize the office is going to change. That's been demonstrated by COVID by the fact that people can remotely work now to some degree, and obviously we've got the technology to support that as well. So that's obviously going to be a big change going forwards. And I think that the analogy of being at your desk at 9 o'clock on a Monday, so your boss can see your face, is certainly a thing of the past. That said, I think it's important to note that people certainly need people, and I think from personal experience of working from home every day for 3 months, I can't wait to get back into town and actually collaborate with my colleagues. And I think that community collaboration piece will become just as important, but will be obviously mixed in with remote working, and obviously trying to see clients as well if you can. So what I think from a more corporate point of view or a company point of view, I do think it will be just a lot more flexible. You'll have a bit more of a hub and spoke model. So companies might take less, we'll call it HQ space, and then might look at some type of function where they have some office space or co-working space near to where their employees work from, so they can have a mix of home working, co-working, and then if they need to go into the office for some reason or another, then they can. But I think the key thing is people want to still feel part of something, and I think that's going to be a real challenge for companies. But I certainly don't think the future of office is of open plan obviously is there, that's for sure.
Are you hearing from your occupiers and your client base that people in co-working spaces are wanting to reduce footprint? Because that seems to be something that's coming through, and we're actually talking to our clients about not doing that, particularly at this stage, for the sense of they need the space to be able to socially distance to bring their teams back, and then maybe to rethink about what they need going forward. And I'm just interested from the co-working space, and Dan, you were saying people might reduce their HQ footprint or their need for that HQ. Are you seeing that now, or is that what you're looking to advise for the future?
I think that will happen going forwards into the future. I think at the moment and I was saying to the guys yesterday, it's case by case at the moment. You know, we're working with some companies, every company is just trying to work it out at the moment in conjunction with their provider. So some will maybe look at taking half the space because they're going to be a lot more remote working in the future, you know, until they work out what's going to happen, all the way through to other people maybe taking double the space so they can have every employee in the company in that office social distance. So
yeah,
we just closed a deal yesterday with a company who were 40 people, and they've taken the opportunity to secure a space which is, you know, far too big for what they need now. It's room for 80, but they're going to use it for social distancing initially. But they've been able to drive a really good deal financially just because of the market currently. And then when the market does return and their business starts to thrive, they've got space for 80 people, and they've managed to secure quite a good deal. So I just think it's, you know, as you said at the start, Vic, it's too early to say really, and everyone's a bit of the
I think the one thing, Vic, that's consistent across most clients we're speaking with as well is the conversation around this. You know, was this ever a conversation we had before COVID? Probably 25% of the time. How big is my actual office demise? You know, a lot of people sell the value of breakout spaces and amenity space within a building, which is still going to be very prevalent and needs to be cleaned properly. But now people are asking, how big is my actual space? How big is my actual office? So what we're seeing from our clients across the board really is a focus on the size of the office space, and pretty much everybody is asking for size in the requirements we've been fielding the last 12 weeks or so, and increasingly so the last number of weeks. So however businesses want to use that space, to Dan's point, there's no one size fits all, but the actual size of the space is really, really important to people now, which in some cases hasn't been the focal point when people look at co-working space. They just need to know there's a certain number of desks, somewhere they can lock their things, and a lot of agile amenity space in a building. Whereas now we seem to be seeing this move towards amenity space is great, but how much actual space do I have that is my own? And I think that's a wider piece on control of environment that businesses are really starting to look at as well.
Even over the, even like this morning, for example, I spoke to 3 different occupiers. One is quite a big kind of tech company, another is a small creative agency, and another company is kind of actually in events. And actually the trace of all those 3 companies, it could have been the same conversation I was having, but the importance of having their own amenity space within the office. So I think when we look at serviced offices or flexible offices, everyone always tarnishes it over the, you know, with one brush, but there's such a spectrum with what different providers specialize in. And I think for us, what we're probably seeing is the ones which are going to be most popular is maybe those kind of smaller boutique type offerings where the occupier does have their own space. They still have the flexibility. They still have a one price covering absolutely everything, but actually having their own front door, having their own space, opposed to, as Tom was saying, the big area with the kind of lots of communal area spaces in the building.
That's fascinating. Obviously, as a designer, I want to run ahead and get carried away and start designing a space built around loads of amenities and lots of open plan spaces and luxuries and all those good things that we want in offices, when actually what we're hearing back is it's about how much space do I have as an individual to work in.
We've got to make sure that that's not confused with that is my desk, because we're going to fall back into that whole allocated seating, need of requirement for specialist teams to be, I can't possibly sit anywhere else because I don't know who's been at that desk previously. I think the beauty around some of the conversations we're having is that a lot of our clients are understanding the need for deep cleaning. So if people are being flexible in their approach and maybe in co-working spaces, I need to take your guys' steer on that, but certainly from the office side, if they're flexible working, activity-based working, all of their items are centrally stored anyway, and it means that desks are cleared every day, and the cleaners can get in daily and clean morning and evening. So I think we've just got to make sure that in terms of how we talk to our clients, making sure that if their space is important to them, making sure that it's space that can be anywhere within that sort of occupier space rather than their desk specifically, because otherwise we're going to go backwards in terms of how offices are made.
I completely agree, Vic, and it's and we've got so much data now and so much good technology to use to help people use their space more effectively. So to your point around around COVID, if you had sensors on your desk that said this desk's been cleaned and is available, then you could book that desk, but you're not going to sit at that same desk again the next day, probably because actually the next day you might work from home or you might be with a client, for example. So keeping that flow is important, but I also think moving forwards, that data will start to shape how these occupiers in the future occupy their space. How much space they need, where they need to put the desks, whether they have a collaborative zone and is it being used, how many meeting rooms do they have. All that stuff should become part of how occupiers in the future use their office, because it's going to be far more effective for them from a space management and a cost point of view.
Yeah, completely.
Do you think they will?
Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Do you think that'll ever transfer onto the flexible workspace owners for the responsibility to put the means and the ability to collect that data in as part of the offering, so they can move into that fully data collection office, ready to go? Will that ever become a responsibility of the flexible workspace provider?
It should. The tech's there, and it's not it's not massively expensive to get these sensors in, and there's obviously the meeting room equipment, which a lot of them have anyway, but absolutely should become part of what they deliver, because it gives them so much good information about their tenants. So they can go to their tenants, say you've got a tenant in who's got 100 desks, you can speak to them on renewal and say, looking at the data in your office, you've got 50% occupancy. So why don't you take a smaller office? And all that stuff will help them retain those tenants going forward. And also just help them in terms of how they fit out their flex buildings in the future, because they know exactly how their tenants want to occupy them. So it's definitely something they think about.
In terms of how the providers or landlords market their space, this is actually more important than ever. So historically, when the provider or the landlord would spend money on a glossy marketing brochure or some kind of PR spin, that's gone way down on people's lists. Actually, people, and we've seen this across the board with different providers actually, in terms of what they're actually doing within buildings. And so far as even over the last week, I've been into various co-working buildings in central London, and I've been amazed actually in the scale of what different companies are doing. And so far as all of them have the tracks on the floor to let us know where we're walking and social distance desks, but others have already gone steps further, and so far as processes of been able to open the doors without touching them, taking away the iPads, and these are going to be the things which are really important to the occupiers. So if it's my company, I want to be able to say to my staff, you guys are really safe because this is what the provider's doing for us. This is the data. This is knowing that we're in a good place here. Whereas actually, if you're going into the building and you're having to type your key code in to go in, and you're going to have to open the door, then you're walking through, then you're going to the shared, if I'm a tenant, I'm not liking that. I'm saying to my boss, I don't want to be here. So it will really help sell the buildings.
And then,
there's a couple of things with that as well, isn't there?
Sorry, Vic.
No, I was just going to say there's a couple of things with that, isn't there? I had a conversation recently around we've been asked for a brief on how to look for a new building with coronavirus considerations. So it's now the point of, traditionally we were looking at business continuity sites that were supportive of terrorism or security breaches or bomb scares, and now we're looking at something that's like an invisible killer or a pandemic, where the shift on business continuity has changed. So to Harry's point, there are lots of these things that are taking place in terms of markings on floors and making sure that there is potential guarding on doors. So, there's one designated person to open some doors or stair circulation through the buildings. One of our clients has got temperature checks on all of the reception entrance doors. But it sort of comes down to Mark's point, in terms of the future, if it's a development or if it's a landlord building for a tenant, there's going to almost need to be a suite of considerations that are now thought of for this pandemic. And I don't know why it wasn't really considered when we had the SARS outbreak, because that was as big an outbreak, if not bigger. And don't quote me on that, I'm not sure on stats. And I don't think our offices and our environments ever caught up at that point. So this is really going to be a game changer in terms of the smart building techniques and the smart building operations and the built-in infrastructure networks. Mark and Robin, the conversations we've been having around BIM and what that could probably do to help support these types of conversations. So it's almost like this checklist is starting to be built, but we don't know how big that checklist is going to have to be.
And ultimately, there's cost savings, right?
Yeah.
You could get very granular with that, and you've just described some of those things. I had a conversation with a tenant last week, and we're looking for a flexible solution, and we actually raised the point of corridors and a circular corridor setup, so that there could potentially be a one-way traffic round the whole floor was seen as beneficial to just having a central corridor. So it's going to be really interesting going forward what different people are going to be prioritizing. But the point you're making, developers and landlords really need to be thinking in that granular detail potentially when they're putting together their buildings and designing their offering.
Not every small company that takes up office space is going to have the capability in-house to do it. It's all very good thinking that a workplace specialist or a big industry player, they will have likely teams and capability to be able to record this data, and a lot of them already will be. But it's companies the size and shape that are moving into shared office buildings and maybe taking up a portion of a floor. We can't assume that all these are going to be pro data collectors in terms of their workplace already. So in terms of adding a string to their own bow of the landlords, it's increasing their service offerings, it's increasing their package, it's delivering value.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately what you might find is some landlords will have to, I guess, learn the hard way a little bit, the same as like increasingly. So in the city fringe where I kind of specialize in, what we've found over the last few years is landlords fitting out the offices for tenants and furnishing the offices. That's now the new normal, the same as like putting air conditioning into a space. And for a long time, many landlords were like, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this. That's a tenant's job. And then they wondered why their spaces remained empty for 6 to 12 months. And yet the landlord next door who'd done these things to the tenants, actually got the spaces let straight away, and he didn't have those void costs. And it could be a little bit like here, where actually some in the city fringe, it's a good mix now, because historically where it's more smaller private landlords, because those areas like Clerkenwell and Shoreditch are now really popular with tech and creatives, you are finding, some of the bigger landlords, the property companies, the funds have invested heavily. So I think they will hopefully, because they have, I guess, the means to do so, they will hopefully drag the rest of the market up with them. But you find, in the fringe market, people like Derwent London own a lot of buildings, and as landlords go, they are up there as the top of their game when it looks at these kind of elements. So I think people will see what they're doing, and they will follow, because they'll have to ultimately get their spaces let.
Difficulties at the moment is people are not having the time to think about these future considerations, and I think it's a huge issue. I personally believe in the sense of everyone's being extremely reactive and trying to support the now and trying to support the requirements. So every piece of learning that's coming through, like I need to return to office, I've got 5 kids at home, I can't concentrate, this is not an ideal, all the way through to well, there's no way I'm going to that building, so I've got to go 40 floors up and take a lift, which could have 6 other people in there, so I'm not going back to work. Every type of learning that's coming through is reacted, and then all of a sudden we get flooded. And I don't know if you guys are finding it, but we find it in our industry where we're flooded with people that do a similar type of role to us and are saying, this has got to do this. And that's not the case. At the moment, we're all sort of planning for the considerations and mapping out the future, and not many of our clients have got the time to sit and wait for that, and they're responding very quickly. So, to a lot of our clients, there might be some initial quite vast spend that's being done, but both in resource time and in physical investments for sanitizing stations or barriers and things like that, that actually in the long run could be not the right thing to do, but they have to make those spaces safe for the return. In terms of co-working, guys, is there any sort of fear in the market in terms of COVID that is causing concern with your clients in terms of taking up co-working spaces because of this, or is it becoming more of a trend that people want them? How is it affecting your space?
I think what I've seen from the tenants I've spoken to and the requirements we're dealing with, it's yeah, no one's shying away from co-working space and sharing a facility, but where it's becoming more useful is, you know, half of the requirements we have at the moment are for out of town, you know, out of town requirement zone, you know, 2, 3, 6, 7, some of them even a little bit further out, where people are looking to leverage that flexible amenity for satellite offices, people that can't work from home and don't find it productive, and have somewhere to work that doesn't necessitate coming into town itself. So, you know, are people, you know, pro or against co-working? It's circumstantial, but we're not finding people are turning around and going, I can't work like this anymore, you know, because I'm sharing a kitchen with somebody else. And it's actually been a real benefit to businesses who want to have a bit more of a regional base. And your point, Vic, on what's the future, people that want to make a decision to support now, but not have to take a 3-year lease somewhere. Again, flexible space out of
on the tradition, yeah.
Sorry,
Tom. I was just going to say, linking to that point, on the traditional side of the market, Vix, we're seeing a huge drive for every requirement the tenant we're speaking to is that need for the flexibility point. You know, so although it's maybe not be a serviced office, you know, the option for those guys to sign a 3 or a 5-year lease now is not going to happen. And what I'm saying to my landlords is actually, you could get a premium of maybe £20 per square foot on your headline rent if you will give someone the flexibility. You know, the flexibility point is more paramount than the cost. It's been really, you know, that's been the biggest thing which people are saying to us.
And it's probably worth, and Dan, you're maybe best placed regarding chats with Dasana, just about what some of the corporates are looking at in terms of using flex space as a strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So Dasana is a co-working app, basically, guys. So they've got it's an app that corporates would give to their staff, and they get a number of credits to basically go and drop into the flex providers and use their co-working spaces.
Great.
Which is really it's something that the market's needed for quite a while. And Michael, who's developed the app, has had a number of very positive conversations with a lot of corporates who are looking at doing exactly that. So working more remotely, giving people a lot more fluidity around where they work from. The hiccup he's had initially during COVID is, you know, the providers have been, you know, had to be very cautious around who's coming into the building and when, and, you know, when people can socially distance and when the space is being cleaned. And it's very difficult. It can become very difficult to control who is in a co-working space and control the amount of people that are in that space and how they're using it. But once you get over that, and again, as we look to the future, that, you know, it's a great model. It's very simple to use. You can do it whilst you're out and about and on the go. And it's actually quite a cost-effective way for corporates to manage their workforce, really, and to obviously see how many people are using it, how much money they want to spend on it, and how much physical office space they actually need to take. So it's going to be quite a successful thing, and we'll obviously keep our eye on that as well. I think from a co-working concept point of view, you know, there will be some consolidation in the flex market without a shadow of a doubt. I think some of the guys that are just doing co-working, so, you know, open plan shared facilities, in the short term will suffer, just because a lot of their tenants are one-man bands or very small SMEs who were on very short-term flexible contracts and have just cut those, and simply won't be using them probably in the next 12, 18, 24 months because they can't afford to do so. All their businesses have gone under. So there'll be a few of those that are reliant on just co-working that I think will struggle. but the ones that offer a bit of a hybrid around private office space and giving tenants that control of an environment, along with a bit more community. We're pretty positive that they'll be okay given the flexibility they offer people.
Anyway.
Yeah, Robin, I think my point was around UK-wide a network of flex providers basically, and IWG is still the only real provider that could offer the coverage that corporates need. So I think it'll be interesting to see us, and from a landlord point of view as well, those landlords that have got a lot of buildings across the UK, if they in the future can link those together for tenants. So if they've got a tenant in London, for example, whether it be a Great Portland Estates, for example, and they've got a tenant in London, how easily can they network their portfolio across the UK for that tenant in London to be able to use other buildings in their portfolio? So if they've got staff in Manchester or in Leeds or in Liverpool, they can work closer to home for 2 days a week. So I think that's an opportunity, I think, for landlords to consider, that's for sure, making it more of a destination per building for tenants.
You've got some of the largest tech companies that are kind of telling their staff or contractual obligations that they don't need to come back to head office. So does that kind of form that satellite setup in and around cities now, rather than having to go to a big kind of plot of real estate?
The thing that's got to be really important here is that I think for when we started in the COVID outbreak, the change in working from home from a lot of people was so huge, and it was a massive change, and people were very uncomfortable or people were loving it. There were two very different pockets. We're now sort of 10, 12 weeks on, and this is our new norm. But there's for me, there's still too many people saying that working from home is going to be the future, because working from home is not something that's sustainable. To your point, Dan, earlier, it's about we're all, all 6 of us are probably dying to get back to see people, because we live on those sort of serendipity moments and having like face-to-face conversations. And actually, for us as specialists, I think we do better for ourselves when we're in front of clients, being able to talk very openly and very candidly about what we do. The concern for me is that too many corporates or too many people are going to think about reducing their HQ, potentially not even having satellite offices or utilizing the co-working spaces that you guys are talking about, and then pushing more of the working from home element, which for me, from a mental health, well-being, too much digital, too much Zoom, too many Microsoft Teams, all of that just feels like the wrong way. So I think I've seen quite a lot of articles actually on LinkedIn this week talking about working from home is the future. And I just sort of, I'd be like to hear from you guys whether you agree with me or whether you agree with those posts, because I just feel that would be too much of a wider push and not good for anybody. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, to your point earlier, Vic, it's at the moment we're working from home, but as a business we can only put a positive spin on it, really, because it's the only thing we're allowed to do. Given the choice, we'd probably be back in town if we could. And some of the tenants that we're speaking to are thinking about the future, and especially the creative industries as well. Creative industries where people need to meet up and see each other and even get inspiration. I went to see a building in town last week, drove in, was all very safe, but it definitely inspired me in a way that I didn't get from a floor plan and some CGI images. There's a lot more creative people than me in more creative industries. So it's really interesting that, that point around home is the future. Maybe it works for some people, but not all. And your other point around mental health is, yes, it's reactive now. A business to their staff needs to put a positive message on it and control that narrative, because there's no other choice. You're not going to get Barclays saying working from home's horrible because they want to make their staff productive. But I think this will form part of studies and feedback, even the next decade or for a number of generations, the impact that this has had on people. We're very privileged to be in an industry where there's a lot of face-to-face conversation, even over Zoom. I think we're all cohabiting with somebody else, but I think there's a lot of people who are particularly isolated at the moment who need work. And that doesn't even talk about potentially people where home isn't a safe environment. So yeah, I think, you know, is home the future? I think that's short-sighted, if I could say. It's the only solution, because I think there's a lot of people that get benefit in a number of ways, creatively or mental health or even their own safety from having the escape to work, as it were.
I think a lot of people really actually, some of the people I've spoken to have gone in, they've had such a buzz to going back into the office. So, you know, gone are the days where actually all going into work again. You know, it's almost seen as a little bit of a privilege, but they're in there. And the feedbacks, as Tom said, from the creatives, you know, no matter how many Teams or Zoom calls they have, it's not the same as actually sitting around, you know, kind of a large table, a large room. We've had more, I don't know if it's, I haven't got any data on it, unfortunately, but the buildings which we've got, which have got outdoor spaces, it's not surprisingly, I guess, but we've actually had more inquiries for those buildings. So the buildings which have got shared terraces, or the office has got a private terrace, actually, because the weather being so nice, I've been speaking to some of my landlords saying that we need to get some, you know, some canopies over the top here so people can actually work from these areas. But that could be lovely in the summer, you know, actually, or even in the winter if you get some heaters out there. So those spaces, you might see all of a sudden on some of the new builds, the floor plates are becoming smaller, but there's going to be a larger outdoor amenity space.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that, though, Harry. You think so? I think for the first couple of weeks when we had beautiful sunshine, I set up out in the garden underneath an umbrella, took the monitor out there, had the laptop out there, and was set up in the shade, enjoying the outside elements. So I think going forward, businesses are going to require a real diverse portfolio in terms of what they're offering their employees for office space. So we do like working from home. Us as millennials wanted that. I think we were a driving force for wanting that flexibility, not wanting to be tied to an office 9 till 5. But actually it's us now wanting to get back into the office because we're missing that interaction. So I think there'll be an element of working from home. We want to be able to sort of focus on that isolated work that requires our attention and focus. But then we'll want to go to the office to collaborate. We'll want to go and meet people. We'll want to go and see people. And then how do those spaces look, and what drives us back to those spaces, I think will be a fundamental point in terms of that real estate.
Well, there's been a lot on work-life balance as well, right? That's going to come out of this, and I think we can all be guilty of dashing into London at, like, you know, early hours of the day and then not getting back to the late hours of the day. And I think I certainly am benefiting from the additional 2 or 3 hours sleep I'm getting from in the morning, and actually being able to do things at home. And in a previous call that we had with some of our peers in the industry, we were talking about that middle management section. So this is more from a workplace strategist side, but when we do change management, we always find that, like, we've got the board members that are really driving forward for change or really driving forward for a different solution. And then you've got the rest of the business that will follow because the board have said. And then you've got this middle ground of middle management that sort of have an issue with not being able to see their team or not being able to sort of focus without their team being around them. So for that middle management section, we're hoping that this type of lifestyle change will have almost been like a bit of a global change program for them, where they can get used to being remote or having a bit more of a, you know, maybe they get to see their family a little bit more in the evening, and that actually outweighs sort of needing to be running into the office all the time. So the pressure on the office becomes less, but also the ability to have more of a, like, actually not take for granted what you have at home. I think it's going to be a huge shift as well. So that's probably going to weigh up how the office spaces and even the co-working spaces are going to be utilised. You know, you might even be getting people a higher peak between like 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. instead of like the original 7 a.m. 8 a.m. starts. So I'm not sure. I sort of live for the drive. I live for running around like an idiot. But we sort of had a conversation about going back to a client site next week, and I thought, oh, that means I'm going to be up at 5, and don't really fancy that just yet. Give me a few more weeks. So we'll see what that comes out. Who knows? But yeah, I think lifestyle and well-being is definitely going to be a huge differentiator into the office environment.
People just want choice. I mean, there was before COVID, it was obviously already shifting that way in terms of, you know, office space becoming more consumable, basically, in terms of how people wanted to use it. And it's just going to accelerate that, I think, in terms of how people want, you know, people will just want a lot more choice around what they do day to day. I mean, from a personal point of view, working from the same space day in, day out at home is just just stifles my creativity. I find
Yeah.
I just find it mentally so tough to stay motivated for long periods. Even to the point when you're on phone calls, you just start thinking, my brain's not really working anymore on this phone call. So you have to go for a walk or something just to get your brain going again. Which, when you're in town and you're sort of walking around a co-working space, I don't have an issue with that. But it's just nice to be able to have that choice and just mix your day up, mix your week up.
The top tip is not reacting, like we said earlier on the call. There's so many companies which, a month ago they were saying we're never taking an office in central London again. I mean, literally a month later, it's like, well, actually, no, we do want an office, and we want to have our own office, and we want to have our own front door. It's very easy for people to react at the moment, and I think what we're seeing on the ground is actually, I'm not trying to overplay this, but there is certainly kind of a lot of room for hope. I was in the office, I went into central London 3 days last week, and I was in doing actual viewings with people, kind of safe distance viewings. So viewings are happening. Dan closed out a deal yesterday for someone signing for a 3-year lease because they see it's a good time to get a good deal. So I think overall, if you look at the take up for, I don't know, last month, April, or I think, April's figures were down probably about 80% compared to year on year in the whole market, which is to be expected. But actually, we are seeing things beginning to change, and there is an attitude where people really do feel that they need an office, and I think every company is going to be slightly different, but it's not a case of the office market is dead. Far from it.
There's still a competitive advantage to be had by having an office and get everybody together. Whether that's creativity or whether that's being near the big corporates who are still holding their space in town and in affiliated industries. But there's also an edge to letting people work from home and have that work-life balance, which a number of studies coming out have shown is a lot more productive than actually having them in the office. What we're seeing as the best course of action is engaging with employees and understanding what they want the next 6 months and the next 24 months to look like. And that's really forming people's workplace and real estate strategies. We've been forced to work from home now. It doesn't work for everybody, works for some. Understand what the employees need, the business needs, and then follow.
As we said earlier on, utilize like the prop tech we have now in the market. Tenants should use this period to take a step back in terms of how they want to occupy their space. Utilize the data that they're being given and start to shape how that might look going forwards. And if that means taking less space and then using more of a hub and spoke model, then so be it. But just use it as a time to reflect, I think, more than anything. And to Harry's point and everyone's point, just don't react to the fact that we can't. Everyone's flapping a bit at the moment,
So Dan, and also for people that aren't familiar with like the hub and spoke model, there is actually some cost benefits in doing that, because a lot of the sort of satellite spaces are potentially in regions, so they're a lot cheaper than potential central London. So there is benefits in doing that, whereas people might see the uptake of lots of satellite offices as increasing their investment.
It depends. Obviously, a lot of this depends on current liabilities for these companies, in terms of how long the leases these guys have got on their large HQ spaces. But absolutely, there's a saving to be had on having a smaller HQ, in terms of a longer term liability space. And even now, moving forwards, whether these 10-year leases now become a 5-year lease with a 3-year break, for example. And then from a spoke point of view, absolutely, Vix, you're more fluid. You can take more space or upsize, downsize as and when you need it. Move into an emerging market, take a short-term flexible contract, from 3 months to 3 years, basically, and have it completely on your terms, with complete cost transparency about what it's costing you per person. So, you can completely future-proof and budget what your business costs look like from a property point of view, as you go forward month to month, pretty much.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're going to be entering state of real flux, not only the next 6 months, but potentially for the next 2 or 3 years. So what we're saying to tenants is keep that in mind when you're making work and real estate and even organizational decisions. And there's the prop tech and the solutions out there to work around that flexibility and that unknown that we're seeing. And the conversations we're having with landlords is, property's quite antiquated traditionally, compared to a lot of other industries. And those landlords that are akin to people's needs of flexibility and general unknown going forward, if they're aware of those and provision for those, whether that's shorter leases, more flexible terms, provisions in the lease in case of pandemics, whatever it might be, those proactive landlords and asset holders are going to do all right. Those that remain antiquated are probably going to find it a lot more difficult, because more and more they're pertaining to needs that aren't there. And in actual fact, the needs of businesses going forward are going to be quite the opposite of long leases and large upfront capital investment, really.
And you're saying, Tom and guys, that like those shorter lease options are available. There might be people that are out there thinking that these short-term options are not around, but you're seeing a lot of this availability. You're seeing a lot of the options for them to sign up for these shorter periods of time, and that's not really a problem for you in your space.
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly correct. The short lease isn't an issue. A lot of landlords have been very good already in changing what they're doing. We obviously help a number of them do that. And there's going to be a lot of flexible space, whether that's sublets, assignments, leases, or co-working flexible spaces on the market. So it's about knowing where to look and how to do a deal, really.
I think that's something that we can certainly take away, guys. That's not something that we've actively been telling our guys, our clients at the moment, is that those shorter, a lot of our clients will be talking about 10, 25 years still. So we're sort of dealing with a lot of the traditional market. So I think, in terms of our onward hopeful partnership with you guys, it's something that we can take along to sort of tell people that the old traditional way of working is also not the traditional way of signing leases these days. You can have those negotiations. So that's really good and a good insight for us. Thank you for that. It's not something I'm
sure knows it's approaching a lease break, or if it had a plan to do something before, and then the lockdown has had an impact on their financial performance, even though they had the desire to do something before, that the resource to do it anymore might not be there. So a shorter term lease while recovery mode or re-strategizing is perfect, rather than rushing into just signing up for the 25 years that you were going to sign up for before. You need to really take an assessment on how this had an impact on the wider performance of the business, maybe, before we start to even consider 25-year leases again.
Agreed.
I think, we're lucky that we work with landlords and tenants, and actually the beauty of that is you can see from the other person's perspective. So actually, if Dan's acting for an occupier, he'll chat and he'll say, well, where's your landlord's head at the moment? And the landlord's head is, look at the market voids or stats for that area. So it might say, well, actually the stats say from half a mile of your building, the same size, it's probable that you're gonna take 9 months to let this. Then you've got your agent fees. Then you've got your rent-free periods. Then you've got maybe works you have to do to the space. So all of a sudden, from that tenant, in terms of what that tenant may want to do, if it's a re-gear or if it's a new lease, looking at all those costs, all of a sudden, the offer which they were going to put in may on paper, the landlord might fall off their chair to start with, but then actually, when they look at it, they think, actually, this is actually okay. Or likewise, from a landlord's perspective, if I'm speaking to a landlord and they've got a tenant who's asking for more flexibility, I'm saying to the landlord, look, Mr. Landlord, this is what it's going to cost you if they move out. This is the risk factor. And it's about being sensible and really understanding where the other side are coming from. Because actually gone are the days of, the landlord basically ruling the roost to say, look, it's my building, Mr. Tenant, you have to basically do what I'm saying here. That is not the way forward anymore. It really is And we've had some landlords, actually, a lot of landlords have given rent holidays, in essence, meaning the tenant will still have to pay the rent back, but that's been pushed back a quarter. And then the interesting thing, we'll see what will happen in June quarter but I suspect that the rents will be pushed back again. But I have some clients who have actually said to their tenants, you know what, we're going to let the rents go. If you can pay towards the business rates like you normally do, you can give me a contribution for the building service charge, I will let it go. And actually, on one hand, I was thinking, why is this landlord doing this? And the bigger picture is they don't have debt on their buildings, but actually, those tenants, will stay with them. And actually, when I look at their portfolio, most of those tenants have been in their buildings for 5 and 10 years plus. And it's because of their attitude to actually a longer term relationship. And it's very easy for landlords to be sorry, you have to pay the rent, I've got my responsibilities. But if you are in a position where you haven't necessarily got a lot of debt in the building and you can help your tenants, in the longer term, they will still benefit massively because of that relationship and that tenant seeing when they needed help. But that landlord really went out the way to help them.
We did have a question actually last week, Harry, week before last, which was if you are a tenant in a multi-tenanted building, and it's obviously landlord demise in most of the areas, and what sort of rights do the tenants have, bearing in mind this pandemic that has set off a lot of questions during tenants, to have those negotiations on the landlord demise areas? Do they have any rights at all, or is it solely the discretion of the landlord?
Unfortunately, it's discretion. I mean, ultimately, the lease would dictate, and every lease will be different. But typically, you'll find in the traditional lease market, the landlords will run that service charge, and whatever goes into those service charges will be then recosted to the tenants. However, I think where, again, you're looking at the ownership is actually those tenants speaking to the landlords and actually saying, okay, Mr. Landlord, what our staff are saying to us, we want X, Y, Z in the building. So therefore, economies of scale, if landlords are putting new infrastructures into the building, into those common parts, if it's the amount of cleaning which is done, if it's to deal with, the reception or the lobbies, that will be in everyone's interest and actually spread over the cost of everyone. You might only be looking at 50p on the service charge. It might even be less than that. And I think, it's up to the tenants to actually engage with their landlords, to engage with the building management agents, to try and proactively get these things changed. But I think in terms of a contractual position, it's very rare that a landlord would allow the tenant to dictate certain provisions, because in a multi-tenanted building, if they allow one tenant to have that, Absolutely. Then it might be 6 or 7 other tenants in that building may not want to have that. So it's, you don't have the power as such, but it's again, it comes to that landlord of actually the opportunity of retaining their tenants and keeping those tenants happy. There should be more of an engagement.
One last point for me on that is, and sort of part of the reason we started Situu really, guys, was, the leasehold and the flex market have never been this close together before. So, when you're out with a tenant, the fact that you can show them leased, flexed, and a managed option in the middle should always, all three should be pitched to tenants now. You've got landlords that are offering fitted space on flexible terms. You've also got flex providers who offer 5-year deals on whole floors. So they're all playing in the same market. The key to it, to Harry's point, is, offering a tenant choice. And what's going to become even more profound after COVID is allowing these business owners to be able to focus on their business and to actually day to day try and make money for their business in what's going to be a difficult time, and leaving the offices to be run by the people that look after the office space, basically. And if you do that well, then, to Harry's point, you'll retain that tenant long term.